Hello and welcome to this special episode of the Career Success Podcast. I'm Jason Connolly, and in this episode titled Lawyers, How to Sell Yourself and Communicate Well, we speak to Susan Heaton-Wright. She's a virtual impact, communication and a speaking expert for emerging leaders. She's also the creator of the Superstar Communicator methodology, as well as being an international speaker, the MD of the award-winning music company Viva Live Music. She's a podcaster and a former prize-winning international opera singer. Susan is regularly featured in media and has recently appeared on BBC News, Sky News, ITV, The Guardian, The Huffington Post and Forbes. She regularly delivers seminars to companies including the likes of Deloitte, RBS, Shell, Microsoft, AXA and the NHS. Susan, thanks for joining me on this special episode.
Thank you very much for having me again.
Great. So we had an absolutely fascinating conversation a few weeks ago in regards to you, your background, your professional days as an opera singer, and what you've been doing with the Superstar Academy. But we wanted to make this episode today in particular about lawyers, how to sell yourself and communicate well. So it's going to be a fascinating half an hour. So thank you for joining me on this very special legal episode.
Yeah, absolutely. I want everybody to grab the opportunity, the concept of the Superstar Communicator, which is a methodology that I have developed, which makes it very straightforward to communicate in different business situations.
So let's talk firstly. I know that not everyone will have listened to the previous episode about the Superstar Communicator, but let's talk about your kind of credentials at the start before we get into how to communicate well.
Well, I've created my own methodology, Superstar Communicator. I identified 5 key skill areas that I believe are essential for spoken communication. They can also be applied to written communication, but my particular forte is spoken communication. My background, I've been doing this for 12 years, but before that, I was an opera singer. And I went from being a very, very quiet person in school, not speaking out very much in class, getting quite anxious, even at university when there were 3 people in the tutorial. Does that resonate with anybody? But I went on to perform as a soloist in front of 2,000 plus audience with a big orchestra, with a big choir. And so along that journey, not only did I grow up a little bit from being an awkward teenager, but I acquired a lot of skills in managing my fear, and as well as engaging with the audience, knowing what I needed to do to have presence and charisma. And it's those things that I bring to the party, so to speak.
And it's fascinating your background as an opera singer. And I'd encourage anybody who's listening to this particular legal episode to go back and listen to Susan's episode about her background. We're not going to kind of delve right into that now, but to be a professional opera singer and how you got to where you are and how you developed the Superstar Communicator methodology is absolutely fantastic. And, your background as a prize-winning international opera singer, I found absolutely fascinating in itself. So talk to us, because a lot of lawyers, and I've been in the legal sector now for just coming over a decade, and we spoke about this just before we started recording, but in universities, lawyers get taught a lot about kind of technical abilities, reviewing contracts, how to, draft amazing contracts. And yes, there is an element of how to communicate as an advocate and how to be a litigator in court and present. But, what we did both pick up on is in universities, people aren't taught how to sell yourself, how to market yourself. And I think you picked up on that yourself just then with, there being 3 people in a seminar and having that confidence. But I think this episode is going to be really helpful for people of all levels of experience, whether you're junior, whether you're senior in the legal industry. So talk to us about kind of what the Superstar Communicator methodology is. And then we'll talk in more detail about how people can unpack this and use this to help them when it comes to, in particular, selling themselves.
Oh, definitely. Now, the interesting thing about lawyers and musicians is that it's very detailed. And in both of those disciplines, you are practicing going into absolute details. Obviously, with music, there is the performance element. So you've got to think about those details, work incredibly hard, and then switch off, leave all of that detail in the dressing room and perform to the best of your ability. And in a way, that's what lawyers need to do. They already do some amazing things, very intelligent, looking into all of the detail. And they almost need to put that into their briefcases and then perform, demonstrate how good they are. How does this come back to the Superstar Communicator? Well, the 5 areas that I identified as being key are audience, understanding your audience. What's the purpose of your speaking? What's in it for the audience? Who are they? What sort of age group? What is their discipline? Do they speak English as their native tongue, for example? So you might need to modify what you say. Then there's the content. Now, of course, as lawyers, you are going to be, with respect, full of content because of all of the details that you know. However, in order for your audience to really take in what you say, there need to be modifications, such as using stories or using what I call headline, not going into too much detail. And then people will ask you questions if they need more information. And the end of what you say, what I call a call to action, which I know in sales terms, that is something that is a normal term, but we wouldn't necessarily think that of a lawyer. Then there's the preparation, and I bring managing your fear into that, because quite often, as I mentioned about when I was at university in my tutorials, I used to get really, really nervous. I still do. It's perfectly normal. There are some techniques you can use, and some of them I did learn when I was at music college, on how you can manage that, how you can get used to that feeling and almost trust yourself to push through that. But preparation is also turning up on time, knowing what you've got, perhaps practicing if it's a pitch for something, all of those things. Then there's the performance, which is your body language, your charisma, your facial expressions, your gestures, your whole presence. And, you know, you need to make an impact. I'm very quiet, believe it or not.
I don't know why I'm laughing. I don't see you as a quiet person, Susan. You exude so much confidence when I talk to you.
Well, I am actually an introvert, but I know what to do.
Yeah.
Basically, this is something that an introvert can do. It doesn't have to be an extrovert activity. And actually, for the extroverts out there, you possibly need to work on listening to other people to give other people the opportunity to speak. So it's a two-way conversation. That's just a little flag for extroverts. And then there's the voice. Now, I'm not going to get people to sing, but I believe
you wouldn't want that, Susan, trust me.
I believe that we should speak so it's as easy as possible for other people to understand us. So it might be that you mumble, you speak too fast, perhaps you don't put pauses between different phrases, or it's a monologue and it's not energizing or interesting. Or even if you've got a very strong accent. Now, you know, for example, if I were to go up to Scotland, I would probably need to speak slower because the people up there might not be able to tune into my voice with respect. You know, we all do have accents, and just being aware of that is very important. So those are the 5 areas.
And I think each area, you know, there's so much importance with each area. And it sounds to me, you know, if one of the areas isn't quite there, then you're not going to get the engaging performance as such. I think that in the legal sector in particular, there's more emphasis now, more than ever, for people not just to be that technical strong person, but to be someone that I don't just think this is exclusive to the legal community. I think I think it's now the world we live in. It's not just enough to be necessarily technically strong or good at your jobs. And yes, there is homes for people like that, but I always think it's those soft skills. That's what sells someone. That's what gets them through the door. And all too often, I see it when candidates are interviewing through our legal recruitment agency. It's the candidate who can talk and sell that story is the person that gets the job. But this isn't just exclusive to, interviewing. It's about being able to market yourself to bring in work. And there's more emphasis than ever on people going out there in order to, do business development. And that used to be something that was reserved years ago for just the senior people in a law firm who would go out. Now there's an emphasis on junior people as well to get involved in that. And actually, especially in legal, if you want to make it to be a law firm partner, you've got to start developing a client base young. And you've got to do that quite, within a relative amount of time. If you get to a certain amount of experience and you haven't developed a client base, then you are not going to meet the partner boat. So what advice would you give to someone? Because obviously we've been through these, I don't know what you would describe them as, these 5 kind of points.
Now, I put them at top level. You go into more details for individual clients. So it might be that somebody is very shy. They've got really good content. They understand that and their voice is pleasant. They've got closed body language. Perhaps they lack confidence when they're speaking to other people. And we would work on that, for example. And
right.
Or it might be that they speak too fast and nobody can tune into what they're saying. And so at client meetings, you can see everybody looking a bit bewildered and the partners saying, well, Susan's great at what she does, but, no one can understand her.
Yeah, she's not getting the message across, or what she's saying is people aren't picking out what, she's trying to deliver necessarily.
Yeah. And they've got to work too hard to listen.
Okay, so what should I be doing to kind of? I know we're never going to unpack these 5 points, and the Superstar Communicator methodology is not something we're never going to unpack during this half hour. However, I'm someone that wants to brush up on my communication skills in general, so I can go out there and sell myself as an individual, not just for roles, but within a place of work. I want to sell my ideas. I want to sell my beliefs and how to improve things. Where do I start? Because I wouldn't necessarily know where to start with all these different points. What would be the beginning of the process for someone wanting to become a better communicator?
It's really interesting because you talk about internal within the firm, which is very important, of course, because when it comes to people progressing up the ladder, if that's what they want to do, it's going to be the more senior people that are going to notice them. And these are not necessarily going to be the most extrovert people, but the people that are noticed for being interested and interesting. And I think it's Harvey Coleman he called it a pie chart. So it's performance, image, and exposure. Slightly unfortunate word, but it's an American thing. But there you go. And
I hadn't thought of anything untoward until you mentioned it.
Yeah, that's just me. And it might have altered now because this was written in the 80s. I've been back to the company and asked them how they came up with these figures. They wouldn't tell me, but let's go with this. So it was 10% the performance, 10% how good you are at your job, only 10%, which is scary. Then 30% is your image. So what people say about you when you're out of the room, how you conduct your behavior when you are talking to the support staff or the receptionist. And we both know that there are people, unfortunately, who will only talk to people more important than them. They'll be rude to other people, but this backfires, everybody. You are part of a firm. And then 60% is the exposure piece. Now,
and that's a big part of the pie chart.
A huge part of the pie chart, and I will send you the image, Jason, if you want to see it.
I certainly do. Please do. Tell us about that, because in itself, 10% is the message, and the message is the most important part.
Yeah, 10% is what you do. So
Right.
it's almost a given that you are going to be good at your job.
Yeah.
So it might well be that it's 20% if you're not very good at your job because it's impacting your image.
Right.
But
So tell us about this 60%, because that's such a large part of the pie chart. And it,
this
you know,
can be everything from you being present in a meeting and contributing to it. Now, I know what it's like in the legal profession. As with other professional services, there's a hierarchy. And if you're
yeah.
more junior, you can feel concerned about butting in or contributing. Yet, I know from the other side, my husband's a surveyor, and he sometimes works with a legal team, and he'll say, well, why are there 5 people there? Only one of you spoke. I'm being charged for 5. If you see it from the client point of view, so put yourself into the shoes of the client and the other people around the table. Make sure that you are contributing, whether it is that you're checking the notes and then saying something, so you're being proactive,
Yeah.
or that you meet the client beforehand and you have an opportunity to talk to them. Or charity is a big one. If you run a sort of charity event, making sure all the time that you tell the marketing and comms department what you're doing. And, you know, if there's an internal newsletter, you make sure that that third party is doing that work for you, but you make sure your firm know you're doing it. And that's the key. Writing articles, going on podcasts if you're allowed to, all of those sorts of things. But the key is that you make sure that you might feel uncomfortable about blowing your trumpet, but if you do it through a third party, that is something that is easier.
And I think you make some really, really valid points there. And I think communication isn't something that's, people are just naturally, well, I think you do get some people who are really strong communicators.
Yes.
But even myself, I wouldn't say that. I used to remember I'd go in to do a speech, or I'd speak up, and I'd start finding the pulse in my neck going. I'd start sweating, and I'd start. And I remember once I was standing up in an absolutely massive seminar to do a talk in front of all these people. And then I said to myself, I need to get this tie off. All I can feel is my pulse going. And then I went into the toilet, was splashing my face with water. Then I gave myself a talking to and said, Jason, you cannot be any worse at talking than the man who is currently talking, who you were following.
Exactly. Yeah.
You just need to back yourself. And then, I went out there. The PowerPoint presentation I'd got made for me didn't work properly. And I thought, you know what? I did the complete script, just went out the window, and I thought, I'm just going to talk. But, it filled me with absolute fear. And I've met people in life who might not be particularly strong technically in terms of work, or the most academic person. But if you're someone that's got a bit of charisma and you can communicate, I think it's the most important attribute in life, is to be able to communicate well, get your point across. And it's even what I do, the job I do now, it's all about communication. And I worked as a police officer for years, which, definitely helped in that regard. I think it's really, really, really important. But I think a lot of the time it's very hard to necessarily get these skills, because we live in a digital, well, especially the generation growing up now. I remember you used to have to call up your friend's mum in order to say, oh, is Bradley there, please? Can he come to the phone? But we live in a generation now where everything's messages, everything's digital. Do you think this, Susan? Do you think we're getting in a generation now where people are losing the ability to communicate? The days of having to go up to to someone on a dance floor and say, would you care to dance with me? We're not there anymore. And I think, we're becoming a community in a world of worse communicators.
This is really interesting, because if we think of digital, dare I say it, AI could replace some of what lawyers do. Our unique skill, our superpower is that we are human. And no matter what they say about AI, it cannot replace empathy and that human connection and building trust. And how do we get that? We don't get that by sending a long contract with lots and lots of clauses. We get that by picking up the phone, or, dare I say it, meeting face to face, which hopefully we'll be able to do next year.
Yeah, I agree with you. I totally agree. And I think that we live in this world now where even people, I know we're digressing slightly because we are talking about legal. However, I look at the amount of emails I get a day from people who call themselves business development managers and they've never once picked up the phone. They hide behind emails. And to me, it just seems like absolute madness. But there is a fear of the telephone these days, it seems.
And actually, the way that people respond when you call, almost as though you have committed some sort of crime.
Yeah, I do agree with you. I do agree. So,
I think, you know, if you are in a meeting and you pick up the phone, it's not my fault that they've picked up the phone.
So you've obviously delivered these training seminars for many, many, many companies, really well-known names: Deloitte, RBS, Shell, Microsoft, AXA, NHS, Quintiles. The list goes on and on and on. But how do you approach getting a company to communicate properly? How do you start the process of turning people into these superstar communicators? I know you sort of touched briefly on it, but if you're a company that's, you know, perhaps now thinking, hang on, I want to get a room full of superstar communicators, where do you start? Because it seems like the advice that you're giving, it's very specific per person. Can you take a company-wide approach to it?
I think so. I think that it's worthwhile if I were doing a workshop with a team within a firm. Of course, there has to be some things that are personalized because people are going to have different skills. But as with all of adult learning, we already know some of these things. We've already got some really valuable experiences, and just being able to channel those so that we can understand and improve and develop these skills. So what I would do first of all would be to get everybody to assess their ability in different things in those 5 different areas, perhaps some additional skills as well. And then we think about perhaps who the core client that they want to target, and thinking about them and what their pain points are, what's the purpose of speaking to them, what's the purpose of the potential client, the audience, listening to them, and then thinking about the content. Now, it might be a podcast like this, it might be sending a letter, it might be picking up the phone, but thinking about those pain points of that client and different ways that you can do the content.
Okay, and just supposing that I'm a young person at university, I'm a budding lawyer, I want to get out there. And one of the hardest things about being a lawyer in the legal community is it's not easy. It's very, very, very competitive. It's really hard to get. Well, it's an uphill battle all the way. You have to get the right A levels, and you need to get into a university. Then when you get into a university, you need to secure a training contract. Once you've secured a training contract, you need to secure an NQ role, and it never seems to end. And once you get to that next milestone, there's a next milestone. It's very, there are other industries which are similar, but legal is very unique for a lot of reasons. Supposing I'm a young person, I'm at university, and I'm thinking, right, okay, I need to brush up on this stuff because I want to be able to sell myself well, and perhaps I am that person who's a bit of an introvert. What should I be doing, as a young person to brush up on my skills? Or is it, the same approach no matter what the level? Or, does your advice vary, people that might be younger and, maybe they're part of the generation that is part of the, the text message generation of what we live in now?
Well, first of all, I want to sort of add one point to the idea of high grades and things like that. Tim Peake was on the television a few days ago, and he was talking about his career, which is obviously as an astronaut, but he started off as an engineer. But the chef said to him, "You got a D grade in physics," and he said, "Well, no, I actually got a D grade in chemistry." But he got B, C, D, which were not massively good grades. They were still A levels. And he said, the qualifications get you the interview, but interpersonal skills and soft skills will get you the job. And you've said that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. It's about how you sell yourself. My grades were never great at school. And actually, that's really relevant. My grades were pretty poor, to be quite honest with you. I went to a very uninspiring school. It was in the bottom 5 secondary schools in the country. But what I did have is, like you, I was a performer. I performed magic on stages, and I'd done cabaret and all different things. And I think that got me in the door with a company like Virgin Atlantic. And it was the ability to be able to engage people, which got people excited. But, I come across a lot of people now where, they might have good grades, but even when I hire for my own business, and I totally agree with you. An academic or a great degree or something will get you in the door, but it takes a lot more than that. And I do honestly think universities need to do more to teach people this soft skill stuff. I don't think they're doing enough of it. And I think it's, they gave people great education, but I think that people need to have these soft skills now, which is sort of so important more than ever. But there needs to be a lot more done. We need to get the Superstar Communicator rolled out across the Red Brick University scene.
Absolutely. But one thing I would say is that in any conversation, there is a listener as well as a speaker. And if you are more introverted, you are still part of the conversation if you are actively listening. And it might be that you can get some really, really useful information about a potential client instead of, doing the hard sell, blah, blah, blah all the time. And the client is, oh, goodness, I can't get a word in edgeways. And we know people like that. If you are perhaps a little bit quiet, it could be a massive advantage to your firm, because then you can go back to the more senior partners and say, look, this is what I heard is going on at this company. I know that they are one of our target companies. Do you want me to follow this up?
Yeah, and I think what you've just hit on there is it's about adding value, and it's about being that type of person that brings something to the table. And I think a lot of people want to say a lot, but actually when you say, and I've noticed this actually, the older I've got, and I think I've picked up on it through loads of different things that I've viewed, watched and whatever. It sometimes saying less is also saying a lot more because it carries impact.
Absolutely. I'm really proud of the fact my headmistress said Susan's got a quiet strength of character.
What a description.
Well, which is fantastic. You go a long way with that. But actually, if you're in a client meeting and you are one of the more junior members of staff and you are watching what's going on with the clients, you might notice something that you can feed back to the partner that they might not have noticed, some subtle body language. We talked about emotional leakages.
We quoted that over, and I love the term emotional leakage. But I think it's right. I think that even, in the work I do, it's being able to hear hesitation. It's being able to sense resistance. But I think a lot of people do, and I think what you say is exactly right. It's not just about the talking, the listening. And I think this is where even with salespeople are, you pick the average salesperson, they are great at talking. They could talk the hind legs off a donkey. But, the example I give to people is you go into a second-hand car showroom or a new car showroom and you get the person there trying to sell you a car, trying to sell you this hatchback, all the great features of it. Look at this. It's got this aircon. It's got these fancy lights. Little do they know that I'm actually a 4x4 type of guy, but they haven't listened. They haven't qualified me properly. And the listening is so important. And I think that's what I say about great recruiters. A great recruiter isn't somebody who can talk. It's actually somebody who can listen. And, I think you make a really valid point there. On a kind of closing note, have you got any last advice you would give to lawyers in the legal community on how to, in any way, improve their communication? We could talk all night about this.
Yes,
we could communicate about communication for a very long time.
Well, you touched on one thing, which was adding value, which I believe is really, really crucial, particularly in this automated world, because being human brings added value. But also, for lawyers, you need to build up trust. So by listening, by repeating what the client is saying, responding to what the client's pain points are, demonstrating with your facial expressions, your body language, eye contact, things like that are absolutely crucial. So building up the trust and showing that you support your client is another superpower.
And I think that's a really good point, actually, that you just made about it's not even about the building trust, it's the power of build. And I suppose it is building trust. I think building rapport is building trust, rapport is trust.
Yes.
But I think the power of repeating back to someone what they've said. And I say this to people that I've trained over the years in sales, that power of repetition, then the person thinks that person gets me, you hear me. And just by repeating something back, because a lot of the time, and I use the term, queuing. A lot of the time, someone will say something, and before they've even finished talking, then the person in the conversation is already thinking about what they want to say back. But just sometimes that power of stopping to say, "Listen, you've just said this. I hear you." It's a great rapport building tool as well as a trust tool, which I guess is one in the same thing. But yeah, it's fantastic advice. Honestly, I think you've uncovered a fortune of gems this evening on all things for lawyers. But if people want to find out more about you, and obviously you consult all across, well, the whole country, and not just the country, it seems like further and further afield. And, I know lots of your clients have gone on to have great success on Sky and BBC. And where can people go to? Because I know that you are very keen to spread your message of your Superstar Communicator methodology as far and as wide as you can.
Yes, well, I coach individuals.
Mm-hmm.
So at all levels, particularly people that are moving to senior roles, perhaps moving towards partnerships. That I've had a couple of recent successes, even during lockdown, which is brilliant news. I also do workshops, both virtual and face-to-face, and also lunch and learn or evening seminars when you want a speaker. Website is superstarcommunicator.com, and I'm very happy for you to connect with me on LinkedIn. There's only one Susan Heaton-Wright.
Well, you heard it there. And I think, a great thing for people in any position, especially if you're going up, and I honestly believe in this, I think you've got to invest in your future. And, not that I'm trying to massively plug you here, because I already love you and I think you're great at what you do. But, I'm a big fan of getting in experts to, give me the knowledge that I need. And I actually, a few podcasts ago, spoke to a really interesting guy, and anything that he thinks he's lacking, he gets in an expert, and it was actually a fascinating story. So if you want to find out more, there is only one Susan Heaton-Wright. Susan, it's been a pleasure, and I hope this adds lots of value to as many people as possible. And it's been great to talk to you again. So thanks so much for coming on this special episode of How to Sell Yourself and Communicate Well as a Lawyer. Thank you, Susan.
Thank you so much for having me.